Hey folks, welcome back to another Q&A episode. Got a great question here. Does lecithin cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively? What they mean is, does lecithin cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively than a choline supplement? All right, this is a second of a two-part question. I answered the first part previously. That's why I wanted to add that context. But thank you very much for the question. So I want to start off with going over what is the blood-brain barrier, try to give a brief explanation. What's really in the name? It is a barrier between the blood and the brain. And the purpose of it is to allow vital nutrients and substances into the brain, oxygen, glucose, amino acids, etc., but keep out like harmful pathogens, toxins, etc. All right? So if you can imagine, the brain has this huge network of like capillaries in order to supply that oxygen, like glucose, etc. And in those capillaries, in the walls of those capillaries, there are endothelial cells. I always love that word, endothelial cells. All right. Now, in between those endothelial cells, there's a network of proteins. Usually it's like occludins, claudins, etc. There could be more in there. It's just what I remember. And the purpose of those proteins that have this network in between those endothelial cells is to prevent paracellular transport. That means prevent those nasty bugs from going in between the endothelial cells to get into the brain. All right. So it kind of forms like a network, like a mesh in order to keep it out. So in order for something to get into the brain, it's either got to go through the lipid bilayer, the cell membrane of those endothelial cells, all right, which like diffusion, so it has to be fat soluble, or there has to be specific transport proteins to allow it to get through the membrane. For example, there are transport proteins for glucose to allow it to get through the cell membrane and eventually get into the brain, because the neurons and everything need a lot of glucose in order to run because they're working all the time. All right, except for mine. Mine don't work that much. So again, in order for something to get across that blood-brain barrier, it has to be lipophilic, fat soluble, all right, so it can go through the membrane, diffuse through it, or what's sometimes referred to as hydrophobic, water-fearing, or there has to be a specific like protein, etc., to allow it, like a gateway to allow it into the cell through the cell membrane. So the question, which one is better? Well, really, they're both the same, because essentially when you're taking like lecithin, for example, or you're taking choline, like I'll say choline bitartrate, well, they get metabolized and it's going to get broken apart. The fatty acids of phosphatidylcholine, for example, are going to be removed, etc. And eventually you're just going to have the choline. All right. Same with choline bitartrate. It gets broken down and then turns into choline and then tartaric acid. It gets split into its component part. It gets hydrolyzed is actually the term for it. So the choline has to then be absorbed in the small intestines. There are transporter proteins. I believe it's the choline transporter-like protein, which is the CLT. I think there's 1 through 5. So there's 5 different CLT transporter proteins, if I remember right. Right? Those are what's called sodium-independent transporter proteins in the intestines. There could also be CHT, which is choline transporters. Those are high-affinity transporter proteins in the intestines as well. There could be a mixture of them. But the point is, there's specific transporter proteins in the intestines to take in the choline. The same is also in the brain. On the endothelial cells, there are choline-like transporter proteins, choline-like transporter proteins, I think is what it is, or choline transporter-like proteins. I always get it confused. I think it's choline transporter-like proteins, CTL. And I think it's CTL1 and 2 are on the endothelial cells. So it's taking up the actual choline molecules because choline is water soluble, so it can't diffuse through the cell membrane. So it gives that doorway in order to get it into the cell and through the apical side, so the side facing the blood, and then the basal side, the side facing where it eventually can get to the brain. And then there's also transporter proteins for choline. I think that's the CHT choline transporter, which is, again, the high affinity. I believe that is sodium dependent transporter to get into the neuron, because you got to get that choline into the neuron, because then the neuron, that's where it's converted into acetylcholine and then stored in vesicles. So the point is really, they're both going to eventually be broken down into choline and then absorbed through the transporter proteins. The only exception that I could think of, all right, is if you're getting an infusion of one, like you're getting the infusion I talked about in the last question, previous episode, like an infusion of like choline chloride, where it's going straight into the blood. But again, there's the enzymes in the blood that then hydrolyze, in this case, the choline chloride, and then you actually just get choline again. But at least in that case, you're skipping the digestive system, which then some of it could be sent into the large intestines, which then could be either excreted, or you could have it to where the bacteria feed on it, turns into TMA, and then eventually TMAO, which could be a health risk there. But again, I don't want to scare anybody. That's, you got to talk about that with your doctor. The point of it is that I can't think of something that makes a difference. I can't think of it. All right. I've talked about it before, and I'll put up the articles here. And this is going to go into a much longer one, because there's somebody else that asked a question kind of similar to it a long time ago, and I need to do a reply to them as well. But I've heard it so many times that, alpha GPC can cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively. And it's like, well, I never, and this is just me, again, I'm not an expert, I never could find any definitive information about, well, how does alpha GPC able to cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively? It gets hydrolyzed in the intestines. It gets broken apart, digested. You just have choline. And then it's got to go through the blood-brain barrier. So there are transporters there. So unless somebody knows the information, which I am, please let me know, because I've been looking at this before even I got this question forever. But I do not see where there is a difference. Now, going back to the previous question, which certainly watch all the content. Lecithin may be better because of those fatty acids that are part of the phosphatidylcholine, which is one of the phospholipids that is used to make lecithin, that it slows down digestion. So if you're taking this bolus amount of alpha GPC or CDP choline, for example, and then it's possible that because you're taking so much that maybe the small intestines, it's harder for it to absorb through those transporters all that choline at one time or a short period of time. So it passes on to the large intestines. Or if you're taking like a soy lecithin or phosphatidylcholine, because the digestion is slowed down, that it has more time to take up that choline, which means now you have a higher blood level of choline. So you have more to get to the brain, to where then the transporters there can get it into the brain and then eventually into the neurons to make acetylcholine. So I hope that answers your question. Again, please let me know if you have any more. And that's for the person that asked the question, and for anybody out there. I will do my best to get back to you with the video ASAP. Thanks again. Like, subscribe, share, whatever. I always enjoy and appreciate anybody that watches it. It is an honor that you took time to listen to me ramble. But thanks again. Much love to you all. Take care. Adios.